Good morning and welcome to the Wednesday, June 9th, 2010 edition of the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Syzmanski. You're listening to LibertyRadioLive.com, and today my guest is author Jon Phelps, also radio broadcaster, and Eric has a website called VaticanAssassins.org. I recommend you go there if you want to learn the truth about the Jesuit order in America. And every time, like I said last week, when I had Eric, I'd have him back on for another appearance. Every time I want to get the juices flowing and understand really what the Jesuit order is all about, I call on Eric. And Eric, today, I just wanted to start out this way. I'm getting a lot of emails that are getting me a little bit angry that people just aren't getting it. The war on terror, Islam, all of this hatred that's being mounted against people. But no one really understands. There are people that do, but the majority of people just don't get it. When we tell them that terrorism was orchestrated here, the Muslim people are being used by the Vatican just like the American people, and this hatred is being whipped up to create a war to kill off the good people of both Christians and Muslims. And I wanted to set the record straight. Let's start out by saying this statement. I want you to prove to us, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the Vatican created Islam, and silence some of these email critics I get, because I'm getting tired of it. Go ahead.
Okay, if your listeners would like to go to my broadcast of the last two Fridays, the last previous Fridays, they can listen to Count Vittorio Vivaldi III out of Venice, who very well shows that Islam is a creation of the Vatican. And we also can see that the essential tenets of Islam are the exact same tenets of Romanism. Islam has jihads, Romanism has crusades. Islam has a central city, Mecca. Vatican has Papacy, Roman Catholicism has a central city in Rome. Islam counts beads. They have little beads that they count. So does Romanists. They have, it's very, very many identical things. I have 10 strong points that I've posted on the absolute similarity of Islam and Catholicism. And what the Count surprised me with was that he said that the papacy has always been in control of Islam. That's why Saladin was good to the people, allowed them to leave Jerusalem after he had conquered Jerusalem. And why he had killed 230 Knights of Malta and Knights Templars. He was killing these Knights Malta and Knights Templars because they were essentially enemies of the papacy. They wouldn't rule the kingdom of Jerusalem for the Pope. So Saladin killed 230 of them. I mean, if we go on and on, we can see, for example, the war on Serbia in the 1990s by Croatia and the Albanian Muslims. This is a continuation of using Islam to destroy the Orthodox Christian people. We see that when Constantinople was conquered in 1453, it falls. They behead the last Greek emperor there, and the second Rome, which Constantinople was called, falls to Islam, that creation of the papacy. So there are many evidences of it. Wherever Islam raises its sword, it always kills for the benefit of the Pope. They don't go and kill all the Roman Catholic people. They don't kill the Roman hierarchy. They kill non-papal Christians, the Orthodox, the Protestants, and Jews, as well as furthering the temporal power of the Pope.
Yeah, I'm just going to use a country as an example here, because I was just checking it out the other day. I'm just going to talk about Morocco, and I'm going to bring it up for this reason. For example, here in America, we see a hidden agenda regarding how the ecumenical movement works, and basically how one day here you're going to have to worship the way the Pope wants you or forget about it. Now, behind the agenda, we have things like Waco. We have other things going on that make it pretty difficult for a biblical American to exist here in this country. But you still can do it openly, so to speak, unquote. Now, you go to a country like Morocco, and you find that, if you start preaching Christianity there are laws against it. And that is all over the Muslim world. Now, tell us about why it's in place this way. I know you understand this quite well, but you'll find that Christians can't practice Christianity in a Muslim world. But here in America, we see that Muslims are welcome in open arms. I think it's to create some type of friction, don't you?
Of course, it creates friction, but it also prevents the preaching of the true gospel to the Arab peoples. Because we have to remember that there are only two racial peoples in the Bible that have biblical promises to inherit. The racial Hebrew Jewish Israelites and the racial sons of Ishmael, which we know today as the Arabs. And so therefore the papacy seeks to do its best to keep the true gospel from going to the Arab peoples, for which reason it created Islam in the first place, to kill out all the non-papal, Bible-believing Christians who are Arabs in Arabia and then North Africa. And so they continue with this quest. They don't want to have the gospel there, because if the gospel goes to the Arab people, they might begin to have prosperous civilizations and a middle class, and a people then that would rise up and say, listen, the papacy has always been our historical enemy.
Yeah, good point. And I wanted to mention this. Can you explain to us from your research how the papacy created Islam? Can you give us some historical facts? It's a huge subject, but just touch on some of the main points going back in history to lay a foundation for what we're saying.
According to the count and according to ex-Jesuit Alberto Rivera, the Augustinians in North Africa tutored Muhammad. They taught him. And according to the count, the Quran was written in Rome. Muhammad never wrote that. He never received it in a vision. And so therefore, Islam, and when you see this happening, then you can understand why Islam never persecuted the Augustinians, the North African Christians. Remember, Augustine was a pagan. The four primary theologians for Roman Catholicism, one of them is considered, all of them considered some of the fathers of Roman Catholicism, of the papacy, doctrinally. And the foremost is Augustine. Augustine hated the Jews. And so therefore, the Augustinians imbibed their hatred for Jews in a religion that they'd created for Arabs, who are the natural enemies of the Jews, pursuant to the Bible. That the sons of Ishmael would always be against the sons of Isaac. And so they fashioned a religion for the Arab people to fit this biblical controversy between the sons of Isaac and the sons of Ishmael. And thus Islam never persecutes Roman Catholicism. In fact, Islam goes into in about the 8th century. And Islam goes into Spain and Portugal area, and it conquers the Visigoths. The Visigoths were non-Roman Catholic Christians. And after they used Islam to kill out the Visigoths or drive them over the Pyrenees into France, then the Vatican uses its military to drive the Muslims ultimately out of Spain, and by 1606 they're out. So we see many, many examples of Islam being used to destroy the enemies of the papacy. And why? Because Islam created it in North Africa by the Augustinians tutoring Muhammad. And one of Muhammad's wives had been a Roman Catholic nun.
Yeah, that's interesting when you look at his life. And now we're talking, what, in the 8th century now?
The 7th century.
7th century, okay. So, yeah, and when you start reading the Quran, you see so many similarities to Roman Catholicism, don't you?
I mean, it's a warlike religion, exactly as the papacy. It calls for the conversion of the infidel with the sword, just as Roman Catholicism calls for the conversion of the heretic with a sword, as Thomas Aquinas wrote in his Summa Theologica, and I have it quoted in my book. They're identical.
So now let's fast forward to 9/11. And you see throughout the 1960s. You know, I'd like to talk about that for a moment. Then we'll hit 9/11 because we've in a sense left it off the table on many radio shows, connecting the dots between how terrorism was orchestrated by the Jesuits. We hear about 9/11, and there's still constantly information coming out about really what happened. But
by the way, before I forget, I put a recent post up on my website on Tim Risser.
Okay.
And that relates to him implying that 9/11 was an inside job on June 1st, 2008. 12 days later, he's dead.
Yeah, interesting. I was just talking about him with a friend the other day, too. Let's hold that thought and maybe touch on him in the second half hour, but I wanted to get back. Many people don't realize the Jesuit roots in Iraq and how they were kicked out of the country, I believe, in the late 1960s. I think we could start there and then move our way into how terrorism has been orchestrated and how these organizations have been fomented by Western money to create this controversy between the Muslims and Christians now that's going on in the world. Go ahead. Start in the 60s with the Jesuits in Iraq. Interesting.
Okay, let me go a little bit before that, Greg, if I can. When Muhammad died, there became a schism between the Muslim people as to who would be his successor. The ones that chose the successor to be Ali were the ones that were called then the Shia Muslims. And so we have this schism after the death of Muhammad between the Sunnis and the Shia. And they are mortal enemies one toward another. The Sunnis hate them and regard them as infidels. And so the Shia now, because the Shia are also really the enemies of the papacy, because the Sunni Islam was created by Rome. Shia Islam was not created by Rome.